So Governor Reynolds has joined other GOP governors around the country, 24 of them to be exact, defending Texas's stance on illegal immigration. In fact, Donald Trump's calling on states like Iowa to send more National Guard to Texas, while in the meantime, Democrats are calling on President Biden to seize control of the Texas National Guard. As you just heard our regional news team report, the Biden administration's given Texas a deadline of later today to allow its Border Patrol agents access to property where they can snip that razor wire. As situation's intense, and this is going to be a story that continues through the weekend. Let's talk it over with a political analyst and a commentator for Young Voices. Dr. Aaron Pomerantz is on the Davison Family Dentistry Newsmaker line. Dr. Pomerantz, great to talk with you. Good morning and welcome to Iowa Radio.
Good morning. How are you doing?
I'm doing good, tracking this very, very carefully. This seems to be a little bit of a tinderbox, I think, going on at the southern border in Texas, Dr. Pomerantz. And I'm wondering, as you survey the situation, what do you think the issues are right now that are at stake?
I think there's a lot going on here, and I think what ultimately is at the situation we've arrived at is a failure of leadership, and I think there's fault on both sides, frankly. The Biden administration has this weird mix of behaviors, and that they're popularly perceived as not having done anything on the border. But if you look at just the sheer number of executive orders given, he's actually outstripped any previous administration. The issue is none of them are working, and none of them seem to have been actually thought through or particularly valued. And there was kind of just a blanket getting rid of any executive order or anything previously that had the Trump name on it. So it's produced a crisis, and it's not just Republicans who are calling this out, right? There were 9 Democrat governors, including the governor of my own home state of New Jersey, who wrote a letter to President Biden a couple of weeks ago saying, this is a crisis, please do something. And yet, on the other hand, you have the Republicans in Congress apparently being willing to kill any border deal because they think it should be an issue of the 2024 election. And they're dealing with a potentially very unpopular candidate who has asked them to strengthen him that way. And then you have Governor Abbott, who's been sparring with President Biden for months now on this issue. And that's it. And that's itself an ongoing situation. And the two men seem to be kind of personally squaring off on this, like last year when President Biden visited Texas, but kind of snubbed Governor Abbott. It's a really complicated situation, and I believe you used the term powder keg. I think that's a really apt description for what we're looking at this juncture.
Well, and that was a very fair assessment, Dr. Pomerantz, because, it's easy for me as a Republican to point out what the Biden administration is doing. And yes, right now there's actually open talk of the Republicans saying, should we do anything on the border during this Congress? Because then the Democrats will be able to say that we did something. And maybe that's bad. And that's politics at its worst, because we have a crisis and we just need Congress to do something about it. I guess what my concern would be is that if the Republicans delay doing something because they don't want the Democrats to act as if that we have done policy on the border, something bad is going to happen that everybody's going to get blamed for. Don't you think that is a legitimate concern, Dr. Pomerantz?
Oh, absolutely. Yeah, absolutely. That's a legitimate concern. It's really bizarre to me how, in every other sphere of life, we have such high expectations of our leaders.
Yeah.
And one of them is accomplishing goals. In almost no business, certainly not in like the main corporate world or anything like that, would this sort of conduct be acceptable, because it would be recognized that this is a bad situation.
Yeah.
And yet, again, the Republicans are going, oh, well, Donald Trump is not exactly going to carry this by a landslide, so maybe we'll hand him a win. That tells me you don't actually care about the border. You care about your party's power. That's not leadership. That's self-serving. And, yeah, it has resulted in something that could be bad for everyone. I was very young when Ruby Ridge and Waco happened, but those are still remembered. Now, I'm down here in Houston. Those are still remembered in Texas. Something like that occurring, which is how I do think any sort of armed standoff between state and federal forces would go down. It would go down as that sort of a situation. Obviously not 100% analogous, as Ruby Ridge and Waco were private citizens versus the federal government. But I think it would be just an absolute disaster for us as a country at a time when haven't been so polarized, certainly not for a very long time.
Yeah.
And I think it's even more of a shame because there is a chance here for unity. There is, you have people like John Fetterman, a Democratic senator, saying there's a crisis on the border. Why can't we talk about this? You have 9 Democratic governors calling out the Biden administration. This is a bipartisan issue. And I think leadership would mean, hey, let's come together and find a solution because both sides need to be involved. This cannot be one party's cause. This has to be both sides of the aisle working together. And I know on the one hand that does sound very idealistic, but I think it's also realistic in the sense that if they don't come together, nothing's going to get done. And if there's one thing we can take from this current situation, it's that playing ping pong with the border or using it as a bargaining chip in passing legislation, that's not tenable. And pretending that this is something that just affects people on the border or that this is a simple issue that, if we just did this one thing, it would be fixed. Of course that's not true. Like, that's not true about almost anything. That's not even true of getting your car fixed, let alone complex geopolitics. So if there's one thing we take away from this, I hope that it's, kick it into gear, work together, try for some real leadership, and try to accomplish something for this very pressing issue.
He's a commentator for Young Voices, Dr. Aaron Pomerantz, making a valuable contribution to the conversation this morning. Dr. Pomerantz, thanks very much for joining me on Need to Know with Jeff Angelo on the WHO Radio Network. So let's talk about this because he's now following up, Dr. Pomerantz just did, with a theme that we opened the show with. I played you Tucker Carlson's comments about why the Democrats are allowing this to happen. They are doing so in order to be able to change the composition of the electorate in a way that they get a permanent governing majority because most full-time first-time immigrants will vote Democrat. At the same time, let's take note of what Dr. Pomerantz just said. There's discussion among the Republicans that you not do a border bill in advance of the next election because it would give you a potent issue in the election, and you don't want the Democrats to be able to say they've done anything. So what does this all boil down to? Again, that the primary goal of politicians is power, and that it's governing all of their decision-making right now. I mean, it isn't Pollyannish to say, we have a crisis at the border. I expect Congress to fix it. Yet one side doesn't want to fix it because they think the voters that are streaming across the border are going to keep them in power. And the other side doesn't want to fix it because they think by not fixing it, it allows them to assume power in the next election. And you and I get caught in the middle. 9:45 is the time. Need to Know with Jeff Angelo.